I now have the great pleasure to introduce Dr. Mike Joy. Mike's one of my heroes, and one of the reasons Mike's one of my heroes is that your enemy's enemy is naturally your friend. And I was at a conference, and Dairy New Zealand spent just about the entire session saying what an evil person Mike was. At which point I knew Mike had to be a really good guy. And I'd heard about Mike through the media. It's very hard not to. But my second really epiphany moment is I did some work for a neighbouring iwi, Ngāti Kaupata, who are in Fielding, which is just outside, or in the Manawatu. And their river, the Aurora River, is heavily polluted. And the kaumātua who are sort of leading the iwi now, they were children when their kaumātua actually put a rahui on the river. It meant they could no longer swim in it, they could no longer collect any kaimoana from it, they were stopped from going to the river. So they've been estranged from their river, coming up now for a third generation. And Mike's had a bit of an eclectic career, and including being a taxi driver in mighty Lower Hutt before the days of Google. So Mike came to what his passion is now, freshwater ecology, quite late in life, and it was via an experience at the Aurora River. So I think it's very important how real life experiences can lead to an epiphany moment that can lead to a change of direction. And we heard this morning from Hamish and from Jono. So I just want to pick up that theme from this morning and link it to this afternoon. But the final thing I just want to say about Mike is a bit like Dr. Seuss and the Lorax, who spoke for the trees. Mike is the person that speaks for the streams. So at this point, I'm going to be quiet and let Mike speak for the streams.
The reason I'm here is because I'm involved with the proposed changes to National Policy Statement for Freshwater, which will interest many of you. And I've been doing some work on Canterbury for a bit, so I thought I'd include Canterbury as a case study, basically for what not to do. So I'm going to talk about freshwater and about these national standards and how they're going to change them. I just wanted to kind of start off, and I guess this is a bit of a personal peeve of mine that scientists don't get taken seriously. And I give the example of I jump on a plane to fly here and I will tomorrow to fly back again. And we would never consider, I don't think any of you would consider arguing with the engineers who build that plane, that set up the loading details for where you can put on the plane, how much you can put and where you can put it. We wouldn't go argue with the loaders. We wouldn't go say we want, if you were flying on it, so you only let me carry 7 kilograms, I want to bring 700, and to hell with you, I'm paying for it, I'm going to put it on there. We would never consider doing that because we trust the engineers that they know what they're doing. They've built the plane within the design parameters. But for some reason, when it comes to science and to freshwater science, then we feel that we can set up some zone committees, and we'll have the zone committee decide on what the limits should be for freshwater. Why don't we have a zone committee to figure out how to load that plane? And a whole lot of people that are on the zone committee for loading the plane happen to be, have some kind of vested interest in putting stuff on the plane, like maybe they're not flying the plane, so on the plane. So that's just to get that out there first, is that trust the scientists when it comes to this stuff. And when we have a consensus like we do around this Science Technical Advisory Group, then it's not plucked out of the air. It's actually really reaffirming for me, and that stuff that I've been banging on about for years around these nitrate limits is supported by the Science Technical Advisory Group set up by the Ministry for the Environment. And I'm going to give the examples of the politicisation that has got us to where we are with freshwater in New Zealand. The politicisation of science the Canterbury case study and then get on to these proposed changes and how they're going to affect us. And the first bit that I'm sure you're acutely aware of, but there's this loss of the social licence of agriculture in New Zealand. I mean, this is a year old now, but there was just 1 month's worth of headlines. And just in the last few days, we've had the big fish kills in Hauraki, all over New Zealand, fish kills as oxygen levels start to decline, water levels, high temperatures, algal blooms, even botulism with hundreds of ducks and things dying as well. A whole lot of effects of a whole bunch of things around freshwater coming together at once. There's studies all over the place that show how that social licence is being degraded, how people are getting more and more pissed off with what's happening to their freshwater. The public are aware now. There's lots of examples of freshwater being the most important environmental issues for people. This is a map of New Zealand, and I don't know how many of you have seen this before. The colours there are actually rivers. The colour-coded rivers. These are predictions from NIWA, and what we're talking about in this case is the MCI, the Macroinvertebrate Community Index, and a measure of the health of the river based on the invertebrates that live there. My most favourite way, freshwater ecologists agree that bioassessment is the best way. You can take snapshots of a whole bunch of things, of chemicals and temperature and things like that, but the critters that live there, they're the witnesses, and they'll tell you what's going on over time. You can map them out over here, over the country. The black dots are the sample sites, and then we use predictive modelling. I use NIWA's map to show that I'm not biasing it by my own work. And you can see that red and orange areas are either moderately or severely polluted, and you know what's going on in those areas. It's intensive farming that's going on in there, and that's where our cities are. And it's bad here, sorry, they put the dots on top of the colours rather than underneath. It was just a report they had to rush out for the Ministry for the Environment. But it's in the places where we mostly intensively farm, mostly dairy, and where our cities are that are the problem. And so we know what the problem is. And it reminds me, I don't know who it was, Max or somebody was talking about, we'll measure the fresh water on our farm and there's no change happening, so we're all right. Well, unless you're doing it with a lysimeter, then you can't measure what's happening on your farm. This is a cumulative effect going down through the catchment. This is not one farm doing this. This is the cumulative, in the same way that you couldn't measure your individual effect on carbon dioxide emissions by measuring the CO2 around your head or something. It's our combined greenhouse gas emissions from everything we do, and I just wanted to point that out before I forgot. Okay, and so there's a whole bunch of other things: ammonium nitrate, total nitrogen, ecosystem health, which is the MCI, and pathogens that Jag was talking about. And see the same pattern all over the whole country? It's the same things happening in the same places that are the problem. So that's why when you get late summer like we got at the moment, you get these things starting to multiply. The last big study that came out a couple of years ago on freshwater quality in New Zealand was quite definitive about what the problem is with freshwater quality in New Zealand. It's not to say that urban impacts aren't bad, and I haven't got the slide here. There's a really interesting slide about water quality around wastewater treatment plants. 152 wastewater plant discharges from towns and cities into fresh water in New Zealand. Only 7 of them comply with standard B of the receiving waters. So they are shocking, but we're talking about 1% of the length of our rivers in New Zealand that are in urban catchments, as opposed to 45 or something that are in pastoral catchments. So I just wanted to make that clear. We've got this legislation, the Resource Management Act, that's really clear that none of this should have happened. The legislation was there, the people who wrote it knew full well what the problem was, and they wrote the legislation. The failure is in local government and Ministry for the Environment for not bringing out a national policy statement for 25 years when it was supposed to have done it back in the 1990s. But a failure by regional councils to implement anything, and having been involved in numerous court cases with our local Horizons Regional Council, taking them to court to get them to apply their own rules, let alone national policy statement rules, their own rules on farming intensification. You take them to court, you win, you take them to court, you win, you take them to court, you win. they change the rules. You know, we're the same when you take the government to court over anything, they'll just change the law when they lose. Okay, so and so what we had was, over that time, complete failure, and then 2014 they bring out a national policy statement for fresh water. And what they did was they shifted the goalposts and they just made everything easier, and I'll show it graphically what I'm talking about. But they switched from talking about, we had all these guideline limits that protected ecosystem health, and we talked about toxicity. And so we moved, so to come up, for example, with the toxicity number, the limit for nitrate in water, you do a really simple experiment. In a lab, you have a tank with some fish swimming around in it, you control the oxygen and the temperature, you add nitrogen until 20% of the fish die. That's an LDL 20, and that's 6.9 milligrams. That's how you do it. It's completely acceptable science to do it, but it's not all meaningful, because it's not like that. Out in the real world, they aren't controlling the temperature and the dissolved oxygen, and that's what I'll talk about, those realities. There are other problems. I'll describe that in more detail. That's not the only problem. We measure water quality monthly. You imagine at your property, if you wanted to know what the rainfall was, you put out the rain gauge on the first Monday of every month for an hour, and then you brought it back in again. Then you put it out next month on the Monday, you bring it back in again. How long would it take you to get an idea of what the rainfall was at your place? That's what we do in rivers. We take snapshots once a month, and then we make all this stuff up about it from there. It's rubbish. We can't do it that way. We have much better ways of doing it. I mean, those nitrate maps that I showed you, we know that they vary daily, hourly, and all that kind of thing. We can see over time that they build up, but we're not taking into account those intricacies that are going on. And we measure nitrate in fresh water because we're worried about the algae that it grows. You put nitrate on your paddock to grow grass, put it in a river, it grows algae. The algae, of course, like the grass takes up the nitrogen, the algae takes up the nitrogen. So you have less, when you've got a big crop of algae, a big algal bloom, your nitrate levels are really low. So you have regional councils saying, oh look, we've done really well, nitrate levels are going down in our rivers. Yeah, because you're growing a huge crop of algae that's causing all these other problems that I'm talking about. It's not that they don't know, it's not like the scientists in there don't know that, it's the political overriding of what gets put out to the public that comes from that. We're not measuring all these other things, habitat loss, the effects of water abstraction, the river engineering, the incredible amount of work that goes on there, the sediment that's going in there. We are trying to measure the nutrients, but barely touching the metals or the pesticides that are going in there. And some really scary stuff happening around pesticide levels in our rivers as well. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about is that this is to get you to understand, because I'm not sure that everybody gets it. Excess nutrients, and we'll talk about nitrate in this case, causes periphyton growth. Like I said, like growing more grass, it grows more algae. That algae then goes through the photosynthetic cycle, and so oxygen levels go up during the day and down during the night, and they start this big fluctuation. And here is a real river, that's the Manawatu River at Hopelands Road. They're sort of lost in the thickness of the bars there, but these are diurnal, daily fluctuations in the dissolved oxygen level. These ones going down here, it gets down to 30% in summertime. 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, 30% dissolved oxygen. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 160% dissolved oxygen. Just doing that and you can see that during summertime, it gets the big fluctuation on, not much during winter. 2 things. We measure that once a month at lunchtime, when it's on the swing back up again, and the councils will report dissolved oxygen is fantastic, because it's on its way from 30% where everything was dead to 160% where it kills another set. The fish get like a hypoxia at that 160% thing. But the guys get there about lunchtime and measure it. So there's the one bit of stupidity. The other bit of stupidity is here, this river that does that, that's been measured, has got that variability. There's a measure that we can get from that variability, which is ecosystem metabolism. And that is as high as being measured, or higher than it's been measured anywhere else in the world. And this is just one example site from the Manawatu River with that extreme fluctuation that happens there. And that happens at the median value there, over 20 years worth of data, it's creeping up, is 0.64 milligrams. So just think about half a milligram of nitrogen. The National Policy Statement limit for nitrogen in fresh water, our current one from 2014 from Nick Smith and Amy Adams, is 6.9 milligrams. So that 10 times less than our National Policy Statement limit, and you get this kind of fluctuation. So as I've said a million times, that you can't, here's that level there, that's the median value at Hopelands Road. There's a picture of the bottom of the bed of what it looks like when it's growing one of these algae blooms and it's doing that. The fish are dead. They can't die again of toxicity at 6.9 milligrams because they're already dead down here. So here's our Anzac guideline, our Australia and New Zealand guideline limit from the science. That was our guideline before the 2014 National Policy Statement. It wasn't a limit, it was a guideline, and a lot of regional councils, including Otago and Horizons eventually, were using that limit there. Here's the Canterbury Water Management Strategy limit. They went for half that, 3.8 milligrams. There's the national bottom line. And here's the drinking water limit at 11.3. We'll come back to that. I think that you've already talked to Alistair about that, or Alistair's talked about it this morning. So 2014, we get National Policy Statement for fresh water. Amy Adams gets asked about that in Parliament. She said, Eugenie said to her, so why did you come up with the 6.9 milligrams? She said, because the scientists told me. And they did tell her that, but she asked the wrong question. She asked, what's the toxicity limit, not what is the ecosystem health limit. So they put these bands on it. So they said 0 to 1 is an A, 1 to 2.2 is a B, up to 6.9 is a C, and then that's the bottom line. So that's your ABCs, right? Just like you would get a mark in an exam. To put that into context, the Yangtze and the Mississippi River, two of the most nutrient polluted rivers on the planet, would score a B under our current national policy statement. This is why you get the Dairy New Zealand people and all the spokespeople, the apologists for intensive agriculture in New Zealand going, oh, well, we don't have a problem here, we don't, here it is here, this is on this map here, this is as you map out the country of those standards. And they say, look, only a few, tiny percentage of the rivers in New Zealand, look, we don't have a water quality problem. We don't, look, we don't have one because here's the map that I showed you before. They made it go away by shifting it from 0.44 milligrams to 6.9 milligrams, and you got clean green New Zealand out of it by shifting the goalposts. And that's why all these people say we don't have a problem, because they've been told we don't have a problem. Same thing, here's the coliform units that Jack was talking about. Again, we don't, it's just crazy that we don't talk about the antibiotic resistant ones, but this is just as a measure of the contamination of waterways. And they made that go away. They just shifted it from 260 up to 1,000, and then you've got clean green New Zealand again. This is what happened under our national policy statement for fresh water in New Zealand. Remember the other part of it was, then things started getting desperate as it started getting closer to that election, the last election. And they started to panic and realise that they were in trouble over fresh water. So Nick came up with this 90% of our rivers and lakes will be swimmable by 2040 statement. Okay, well, it sounded fantastic. 80% swimmable by 2030 and 90% by 2040. Then it turns out that actually, in the fine print, it only applies to lakes greater than 1.5 kilometres in diameter, which is 25% of it, only applies to 25% of our lakes. Crucially, it only applies to fourth order waterways, or greater than fourth order waterways. And so, did people heard of water before? Just quickly, start up in the mountains, two little streams join up, and that becomes a second order stream. It's a second order stream until another second order stream joins it, then it becomes a third order. And then when two third orders join, it becomes a fourth order that way. So it's a measure of the size of the stream. In our country, we don't have many waterways that are bigger than fourth order because, apart from a few big rivers, we don't have that. So actually it turns out that the 80%, 90% is of 12%. See how you can just magically make something go away? They did the same kind of rubbish with the swimming water stuff as well. So it's actually our goal is to have 20% of 12% swimmable. So it's a fake claim, but just, again, that politicisation. So here's our Canterbury example here of complete failure by regional council, and I mean, it's been going on a long time, but a lot of it's happened on their watch, of a whole lot of red zones there. So, and a whole lot of issues with nitrate loads going up in the aquifers and the spring-fed streams, the wrong limits like they talked about there, human disease, and I'll talk about that, biodiversity loss, problems with overseer here, the problems with those zone committees and the representation on them, whole lot of issues here. So I just mapped out here using those real guidelines, how many, so the three, if it's red, it means it fails on all three of those, nitrogen, phosphorus, and E. coli. That other beigey colour means it fails two of them, blue means it fails one of them, and green means that it's okay. So you can see huge problems for water quality in Canterbury. Huge problems for the whole country. We've got an increase, I just bumped into Rich over here this morning actually. Anyway, these two authors here that just did this, the human-induced increase in yields of nutrients in New Zealand rivers. Nitrate nationally up 159% on natural, and for Canterbury 257% increase on natural nitrate levels in waters. And I guess you've already talked about it today, but I keep wanting to talk about synthetic nitrogen is made from fossil fuels. If you're making food out of fossil fuels, I mean, we already do enough of that with the transporting and everything else, but if your fertiliser comes directly from fossil fuels, then it's got to be the most unsustainable thing anyway. Lots of energy use going in there. Only 17% of that goes into the food. The rest is lost to the system and causes all these problems we've got in our rivers and our lakes. We've got nitrous oxide issues as well as a really potent greenhouse gas as well. We can measure this nitrate in the atmosphere as well, and it's going up at the same rate as carbon dioxide, and the eutrophication and the dead zones. We're getting impacts offshore in New Zealand as well now. So watch down here, this is the dates ticking over, the years, down in the bottom right hand corner, I hope you can see it. The orangey blobs are dairy farms. I just want you to look at the spread of dairy in New Zealand. Starting in 1990s, away she goes. And a lot of you are from here and you'll know about the irrigation that went with that. So you took this dry country, mostly cropping and sheep and beef, and you turn it into a huge dairy farm. And so I wanted there's an example of a Resource Management Act, and you know, that time with the Resource Management Act coming into force. So you can see that spread that happened there. And then this is what, I'm sure Alistair would have talked about this morning, the ecosystem health impacts of nitrate I've talked about, the toxicity effects, but it affects humans as well. So nitrates in drinking water, and that's a really big problem because of the groundwater nitrates that are being drunk here. So there's this big study, and myself and Michael Baker, who's in the news a lot with this COVID stuff at the moment, wrote this up for another paper as well. That nitrate in drinking water at very low levels, actually very similar to those levels that I'm talking about to protect the ecosystems, turn out to give us a significant increase in the chance of getting colorectal cancer as well. So this becomes a really big human issue as well. So we've got our clock ticking over again. This time the red bars are when they exceed 2.1 milligrams, which I'll come back to. There's a 15% increase in the chance of getting colorectal cancer once it exceeds 2.1 milligrams of nitrate in drinking water. So these are the ECAN bores, and you can see those increases matching the intensification of dairy that happened in the region. You've got, you know what, these very stony, very just alluvial soils, very quick movement of nitrate from the cattle from the farming through urine mostly, into the groundwater, into these aquifers, and then getting into the drinking water. Then sort of a combination of things here to show you a and I could give a whole hour on how ECAN has played with the numbers to make it look like it's not such an issue. In their report, they put out a report every year, this annual groundwater survey, the latest one I could get was in 2018, they reported that 18% of them were getting worse. When I took their same data and applied it through the same software that they use, but actually report it using the industry standard, it's actually 66% of them that are getting worse. They chose to do this very strict measure, and they only said it was getting worse if it was in the sort of most extreme statistical change. When the industry standard and the software that is provided to them that we all use gives this other range of likelihoods, and they chose not to do that. But anyway, so you can see that it's getting worse, and it's going to keep on getting worse. So back to this, so when those numbers again, and here's the drinking water standard, and hopefully Alistair explained this morning here, that's just related to babies in that first 6 months of their life. Here's the Anzac guideline for groundwater for aquatic toxicity. Remember, the same as in the rivers, that's when things are actually killed. There's the Canterbury limit here. Here's the limit for when it gets up to this level is an indication of high intensity land use. The threshold here for the 15% increase in the risk of getting colorectal cancer. Here's the Anzac guidelines for aquatic species protection. And right down here, less than 1 milligram, there's a significant increase in the chance of getting colorectal cancer if you're drinking that water. And I pulled out the numbers for the ECAN sites, of those groundwater sites there. So 72% of the groundwater sites of the 320 that they monitor exceed that significant increase in the likelihood of getting colorectal cancer. That level that's indicative of anthropogenic effects right through to here, that really into high intensity land use impact more than half of those sites. So it's showing up in the groundwater samples. I came to Canterbury last year, some of you might have seen this in the news, bought my $25,000 nitrate meter with me and can do instant sampling. And we went out on the road, drove all around all the North and South Canterbury, just stopping at every little town, grabbing a water sample from the public water supply, plus a bunch of people brought them in. I had 113 samples from that little trip down here, and you can see that 2/3 of them exceed that 2.1, which is the 15%. This is people's drinking water. Two-thirds of them exceed that 15% increase in the risk, and what nearly probably 70 or 80% of them exceed the significant risk of those people that brought them in. This is rural Canterbury here. And here's the data that I managed to get from the Christchurch City Council, so this is within the city limits. And you can see that even within the city, where everybody considered that it was on this deep bore and it was fantastic water in Canterbury, in Christchurch City, that 1/3 of them are getting well above that 15% increase in the risk, and about half exceeding that significant risk level, and that's for central Canterbury. ESR they realise there's a problem. Now, by the way, the government announced the other day, I think due to a whole bunch of pressure going on from the likes of me publishing those papers and getting pressure on them, that they're going to do a study into this link between nitrate and cancer. But anyway, ESR did this a couple of years ago, and I just pulled out the Canterbury stuff, and they don't tell you how many people are on it, but the water supplies that are given to 500 people or more went in this study. So it could be 50,000 people, it's just more than 500. So when I applied the 2.1 milligrams, then 21 of the supplies exceeded, which means that at the absolute minimum, if there were just 500 people on each one of those ones, then the absolute minimum is 10,500 people exceeded in receiving drinking water in Canterbury that exceeds the 15% increase in the risk of getting colorectal cancer, and 33,000 that it's, I think, is significant. So this is a big risk for people of Canterbury. It's not just in here, it's not just in Denmark. The states have been doing it, and they've been putting some costs on the health effects of this nitrate. And this is nearly all synthetic nitrogen that we're talking about here. So we're talking about some really big costs into the future from what we're doing at the moment. And so just to touch on economics, I know I probably should leave this for Pete, but Warren Parker, when he was at Scion, when he was a CEO of Scion, he did this little bit of work, and I just wanted to kind of get over this, but it's the backbone of the country story.